I'm 61 years old now, and the winter sun that spills across my cabin floor feels thinner than it used to, as if even the light is tired of carrying my secrets. I sit here with my hands trembling over this old tape recorder, knowing that once I press this button, there's no turning back. For 44 years, I've held a burden that has chewed through every quiet night of my life, a memory I refuse to share with anyone. Not my wife while she lived, not my children as they grew, not even the forest that raised me. But time is a shrinking road, and before mine ends, someone needs to hear what happened in October of 1981. Someone needs to understand why I still wake gasping at the sound of metal doors slamming shut. I didn't know then that the creatures sitting across from me were carrying their own ghosts. The air in that underground facility still clings to me, like dust trapped deep in my lungs. Cold concrete, the low hum of fluorescent lights, the metallic taste of fear settling on my tongue. Every detail sits in me as sharply as it did that night. They escorted me through corridors carved from gray stone, each step reminding me I didn't belong in that place of secrets and shadows. I had been a tracker, a linguist, a wanderer of forgotten trails, but never a man invited into the heart of federal darkness. When the elevator doors opened, an old instinct stirred behind my ribs. Something whispered, "Turn around, go back to the mountains." But I followed the agents anyway, unaware that each step was leading me toward a truth I had been running from since 1977. When I first saw the pair, one towering even while seated, the other hunched protectively beside him, I felt my breath lock inside my chest. Chains rattled softly with their every shift, yet the creatures did not pull or rage. They sat still, their massive shoulders rising and falling in slow, exhausted breaths. The male's fur was matted with dry blood along his ribs. The female's eyes shimmered with an expression I didn't expect. Grief. Not anger, not animal panic. Grief, deep and human in its weight. The agents muttered about containment protocols and sedation levels, but their words drifted away. All I could see was the subtle way the female leaned toward the male, her hand brushing his forearm as though reminding him she was still there. I had seen that gesture only once before. Back in '77, a blizzard nearly took my life. I had slipped on an icy ridge, fractured my ankle, and waited for death to finish the job. But something enormous approached through the storm, breathing warm, pine-scented air over my face. A creature lifted me in its arms, humming a low vibration that kept panic at bay. It carried me to a shelter hollow and stayed with me through the night, tending my wounds with gentle, deliberate motions. When dawn came, it touched my chest once, soft as snow, before disappearing into the trees. I never spoke a word of it. People already thought I spent too much time alone in the woods. But now, looking at the chain pair, I recognized that same tenderness in the female's touch. A memory flared through me like lightning. The warmth of that humming, the way it quieted the terror in my veins. The lead agent barked orders, snapping me out of my reverie. They wanted me to interpret behavior, as if I were reading tracks in the mud instead of facing beings who looked back at me with unmistakable awareness. I nodded, though my heart pounded with something more complex than fear. The creatures watched as I stepped closer. The male's eyes, dark as wet bark, fixed on mine with a searching intensity that rooted me in place. I sensed no malice there, only pain and a deep, weary caution. The female's gaze followed, and something inside me shifted. The room felt smaller, the air heavier, and I realized that whatever had brought them out of their hidden world had carved sorrow into their bones. I lowered myself into the metal chair across from them. The lights above flickered, scattering shadows across the concrete walls. The female flinched subtly, and the movement carved an ache through my chest. She looked at me with an expression I can only describe as pleading. The male turned his head slightly, as if gauging whether I was a threat or an answer. Their breaths synchronized, the female's fingers curling protectively around his wrist. They were a pair, not in the human sense, but in the quiet, unbreakable way living things cling to each other when the world begins to fall apart. And in that moment, I understood they were survivors, not captives of aggression. I spoke their first wordless greeting the same way I had whispered it into the storm in '77, a low, steady hum. The sound vibrated in my throat, traveling across the cold air between us. The female's eyes widened. The male's posture straightened, a ripple of recognition passing through him. The agents behind the glass leaned forward confused, but I didn't turn. My voice trembled, but I hummed again, softer this time, letting the memory of that snowy hollow guide me. And then it happened. The female answered. Her chest released a faint echo of the sound, trembling, fragile, yet unmistakably deliberate. The male glanced at her, then at me, and for a breathless moment the room felt suspended between past and present. Before I could speak, the intercom crackled. The agent's voice cut sharply through the room, cold and commanding. Begin the formal interrogation. I glanced back at the pair. Their bodies tensed, their sorrow deepened, and in that fragile silence, I felt a shift inside the room, a thin thread of recognition binding us. I didn't know then what they were about to confess, or how deeply their truth would carve into the bones of the agency and my own life. But as the door sealed shut behind me and the light steadied overhead, I sensed the world narrow into a single, terrifying question. Why had they come to us at all? The door sealed behind me with the heavy finality of a vault, and for a moment, the room held its breath. The air felt colder than before, as if the concrete itself sensed a danger gathering beneath the surface. The pair sat motionless, but not still. Every breath, every shift carried weight. 7 hours stretched ahead of us, a corridor of time neither they nor I were prepared to walk. Yet in that first suspended heartbeat, all I could think about was the faint trembling in the female's shoulders and the quiet endurance in the male's eyes. They were waiting for something, perhaps mercy, perhaps judgment, and I was the only one the Bureau trusted to deliver either. The agents behind the glass wanted answers. They wanted patterns, threats, risks, but I saw something different the longer I studied the pair. I saw the exhaustion etched into their posture, the silent communication flowing between them in subtle movements, the twitch of a finger, the angle of a brow, the slow turn of a head. It was a language older than ours, shaped not by words but by necessity. I took a breath and stepped closer, the echo of my boots sounding too loud in that quiet space. The male's gaze followed every inch of my approach. His muscles tensed, but he didn't lunge. He simply watched, protective, calculating. The female leaned into him, her breath trembling like wind through dry leaves. I began with the same steady hum I'd used before, careful not to let my voice betray the tension coiled beneath my ribs. The low sound drifted through the cold air, brushing against silence like a hand upon still water. The female responded first, a faint vibration in her chest, weak but deliberate. The male followed with a deeper resonance, one that vibrated in my bones. The agents behind the glass shifted uneasily, but I held my ground. Their voices were music, fragile, wary, but undeniably intelligent. I felt time tilt slightly, the room narrow into the three of us, as though the outside world had dissolved. The first hour passed in a slow exchange of breath and sound, the beginnings of trust weaving unsteadily between us. I watched the male's posture soften a fraction, the rigid line of his shoulders easing. Every so often, his eyes flicked toward the cameras, a subtle acknowledgement that he knew he was being observed. The female's gaze stayed mostly on me. She studied my hands, my breathing, the rhythm of my hum, as though searching for something familiar beneath the human exterior. I didn't blame her. Trust is a fragile thing, too easily broken, too slowly rebuilt. In the second hour, I risked something bolder. I extended my hand, palm up, a gesture of peace I had learned from the mountains themselves. The male stiffened, a warning rumble growing in his chest, but the female lifted her hand slightly, fingers trembling. When her fingertips brushed mine, the contact was feather-light, electric. It was not the touch of an animal, but of a being choosing courage over instinct. That tiny moment felt like stepping onto a frozen lake and hearing it hold instead of crack. She withdrew quickly, but the shift had happened. The male watched her, then me, and the rumble faded from his chest. The agents behind the glass argued in hushed voices. They didn't understand what they were witnessing. They only saw risk. I saw something else entirely. Grief softened by hope. The pair were not simply communicating. They were trying to make me understand. And the longer I listened, the more I felt that their presence in that room was not an accident or a victory of human tracking. They had allowed themselves to be found. No creature with senses as sharp as theirs would be cornered unless something far worse waited behind them. By the third hour, the male attempted the first real gesture. He tapped the floor with the side of his fist, slow and rhythmic, then pointed toward the ceiling lights. The movements were stiff, hindered by the chains, but intentional. I watched, piecing together fragments of the memory that flickered in his eyes. A flash of brightness, a tremor, a burst of heat. The female covered her face with her hands, her breath breaking into a sharp, trembling sound. Grief washed over her like a collapsing wave. I felt my own throat tighten, though I didn't yet know why. I leaned forward, whispering a soft sound of acknowledgement. The male released a low exhale, not relief exactly, but recognition. I was trying. I was listening. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough for him to continue. In the fourth hour, agents stormed into the intercom with frustrated commands. They demanded translations I didn't yet have, threatened to take over the interrogation. Their impatience hung thick in the air, a poison neither I nor the pair could ignore. The male stiffened, hackles rising. The female reached for him again, and I mirrored her gesture, raising my hand slowly in an attempt to calm him. The agents didn't understand that cruelty would break the fragile thread we had woven. They believed force was the only language worth speaking. But fear is a blade that cuts both ways. In the fifth hour, a strange shift occurred. The male leaned toward me, making a low, steady vibration that resonated through the floor. I recognized the cadence immediately, the same rhythm my rescuer had used decades earlier to lull me out of shock. He was telling me he knew. He knew I carried the scent of one who once belonged to them. He knew I had been touched by their world. A jolt ran through me, an old warmth rising from the depths of memory. Something ancient and intimate pulsed through the space between us. As the sixth hour unfolded, their message sharpened. Through gestures, hums, and trembling motions, they conveyed an image that chilled my blood. Fire moving through trees, explosions beneath roots, thunder that wasn't thunder. Something had driven them from their home. Something human. Something spreading. They hadn't come to threaten us. They'd come because they were running out of places left to run. In the seventh hour, the room's fragile peace shattered. A sharp alarm buzzed overhead, and the intercom erupted with panic orders. Agents rushed outside the glass, and the pair recoiled. The male shielded the female reflexively, positioning himself between her and the threat. I shouted for calm, but my voice drowned beneath the blare. The lights flickered violently, and for one suspended second, the male looked directly into my eyes with a clarity that stole my breath. He knew what was coming. He knew the Bureau would not listen. And in that haunting gaze, I finally understood the truth they had been trying to give me since the first hour. They had not come to warn the government. They had come to warn me. The alarm finally died, but its echo lingered long after the room fell silent again. The pair crouched low, trembling beneath the fading lights, and for the first time since the interrogation began, I saw a raw panic flicker through the male's eyes. Not fear of the agents or the metal doors or needles waiting just outside the glass. This was something deeper, older, carved into the marrow of survival. I felt it settle into me like a cold stone. Whatever had driven them out of the mountains was not merely danger. It was devastation. As the light steadied and the agents muttered behind the glass, I lowered myself to the cement floor, bringing my eyes level with theirs. The female blinked at my movement, her breath hitching as though the unfamiliar quiet self was a threat. The male studied me with a sharp, wary intelligence I could no longer dismiss as instinct alone. He saw the cracks in my certainty. He sensed the questions clawing at my thoughts. And in the stillness that followed, he began to show me the truth they had carried into that room. He tapped the ground again, slower this time. 5 strikes. A pause. 3 more. Then his hand shifted into a sweeping arc, ending with his fist pressed to his chest. It was a narrative, not a warning, an attempt to weave memory into movement. The female lifted her head and added a soft, broken hum. I felt it in my sternum, a vibration that carried grief like an undercurrent of thunder. Images assembled in my mind as if built from the rhythm of their breaths. Trees shaking with unnatural explosions, fire curling through old forest canopies, the elder who once saved my life standing between destruction and his kin. My throat tightened as I pictured the hollow where I had nearly died in 77, the same place where a gentle giant had tended my wounds. I wondered if he was the elder they mourned now, if the warmth that carried me through that storm had belonged to the same soul whose absence cracked through their gestures like lightning. I tried to steady my voice as I whispered a low, encouraging hum. The male responded immediately, tapping faster, his eyes burning with urgency. The female reached out and touched his arm as though grounding him, reminding him not to slip into panic. When she lifted her gaze, a single tear traced through the fur at the corner of her eye. It struck me harder than any sound. These creatures were not beasts fighting extinction. They were a family mourning the fractures of their world. And suddenly the threads connected. The traps scattered through the mountains. The unseasonal fires. The deep thunder that had rattled through the valleys the summer before. These were not accidents. Someone, something, had pushed their tribe out of hiding. The pair had not sought refuge. They had fled ruin. Behind the glass, the agents whispered urgently. They wanted answers I could not yet give. Their impatience beat against the back of my skull, but I ignored them. My focus stayed locked on the pair. I watched the male curl his hand into a trembling fist before pressing it against the floor. The meaning was clear now. Death, loss, finality. When he lifted his fist again and opened it slowly, palm up, the gesture gutted me. It was the same motion the elder had made the morning he saved my life. A goodbye, a final act of trust. I felt heat sting my eyes as understanding struck me like a hammer. The elder had died protecting them, and in the language of their kind, they were telling me he had died because of us. I swallowed hard and forced myself to speak, keeping my tone low and steady. "I'm listening," I said, though my voice cracked around the edges. The male's shoulders drooped in a weary exhale. The female leaned closer, her breath shaking. She lifted her hand and traced lines in the air, waves, then falling arcs, then a jagged downward slash that mimicked collapsing trees. I understood. Forest destroyed. Territory erased. Their home turned to ash and chaos. The pair watched my face carefully, waiting to see if the meaning had reached me. When I nodded, relief softened their expressions, but only for a heartbeat. Something heavier followed. The male reached his arm toward me despite the chains, his hand hovering halfway as if unsure he had the right. I steadied myself and extended mine. When his massive palm settled against my fingers, the contact was shockingly gentle. His touch carried warmth, fatigue, and a plea older than language. He wasn't asking for freedom. He was asking for understanding, asking me to carry something forward that they no longer could. A weight passed between us in that moment, one that tightened around my chest like a promise I was unprepared to make. He lifted his other hand and tapped his heart twice. Then he pointed at me. I knew what he meant. The elder's kindness had not been forgotten. His memory lived in their grief, and they believed I was the one human capable of honoring him. The intercom snapped on with a jarring buzz. The lead agent's voice cut through the fragile connection like a blade. Transfer is scheduled at dawn. Prepare the subjects for sedation. The male recoiled, pulling the female close. She let out a soft, wounded sound that scraped through me like broken glass. I rose quickly, shouting into the intercom for them to wait, to reconsider, to understand that sedation could kill them. My protest flattened against bureaucratic indifference. To them, the pair were specimens. Risks, data, nothing more. The male's eyes followed me as I argued, and in them I saw an understanding that chilled me more than the concrete floor ever could. He knew what sedation meant. He knew dawn would not bring mercy. When the intercom clicked off and silence returned, the female reached toward me again. Her hand hovered in the dim light, trembling with trust and desperation. I stepped forward, letting her fingertips brush mine. The connection made something inside me collapse inward, an ache sharper than guilt, deeper than fear. They weren't just asking me to understand. They were asking me to act. Outside the room, boots thundered down the hallway, agents preparing for night, preparing for dawn, preparing for sedation. The male straightened slowly, lifting his chin with the dignity of someone who had lost everything but refused to surrender what remained. His gaze locked onto mine, and for the first time, I felt the full gravity of their confession settle squarely onto my shoulders. They had come to give me the truth, and now that I understood it, I also understood the terrible cost of doing nothing. As the footsteps neared and keys rattled against metal, the male leaned forward, his final gesture searing itself into my memory. A single tap to his chest, then to mine, then toward the dark corridor where the agents gathered. A plea, a warning, a call to action. And as the door began to unlock, I realized with a hollow, sinking certainty that the next choice I made would change all of our lives, perhaps even end them. The moment the keys scratched against the metal door, something inside me snapped into terrible clarity. I had spent my life tracking the quiet truths of the wilderness, but never once had I been forced to choose between loyalty to my own species and loyalty to the beings who had once saved me. The male watched the door with a stillness that felt carved from stone. The female pressed close to him, trembling, her breath rising in short, unsteady bursts. I knew what the agents intended to do once they entered. Sedation, transportation, dissection masked as research. The pair would not survive the night. The elder had once carried me out of the storm. Now his kin were drowning inside a storm my own people had created. I could not let dawn take them. The hallway lights flickered with the growing blizzard outside, each flash casting shards of shadow across the room. I stepped closer to the pair, lowering my voice into the same steady hum that had once soothed me in the mountains. The male leaned forward, understanding before I spoke a word. I pointed toward the maintenance door behind the storage lockers, an exit few agents even remembered existed. His eyes narrowed, not in confusion but in resolve. The female clutched his arm, uncertain. I whispered, "Trust me." My voice shook, not from fear of the agents, but from the weight of betraying the world I had sworn to serve. When the door finally swung open, 3 agents stepped inside, their faces pale beneath harsh lights. They carried syringes, restraints, orders stamped with authority. I moved quickly, stepping between them and the pair. "They won't survive sedation," I said, the tremor in my voice raw and genuine. "Give me more time. I'm close to understanding." My words were cut short by the agent in charge, who pushed past me with a cold efficiency that snapped the last thread of restraint inside my chest. He raised a syringe toward the female, and in that single moment, the male surged upward with a growl that shook the walls. Chaos erupted. Agents shouted, stumbling back as the male shielded the female with a desperate ferocity. In confusion, I reached toward the panel beside the maintenance door and slammed my fist against the emergency override. The old mechanism groaned, lights sputtered, alarms wailed. A brief blackout swallowed the room, plunging us into an abyss of echoing footsteps and panicked breaths. I grabbed the female's arm gently and guided her toward the opening door. The male followed, pressing her forward, his massive body forming a barrier between us and the agent scrambling to restore light. The maintenance tunnel yawned ahead, narrow and cold, its concrete walls slick with frost. The storm outside had knocked out part of the facility's power, and distant emergency lights flickered like dying embers. The pair moved clumsily with their injuries, the female leaning heavily on the male. I supported her other side, feeling the tremor of her exhausted muscles. The male grunted softly, urging her onward. Behind us, shouts echoed to the corridor as agents poured into the darkness. "Hurry," I whispered, though my breath was already burning in my chest. We reached the final service gate, a rusted metal fence separating us from a tree line beyond. Snow whipped against it, driven by winds that howled like wild spirits. The forest waited on the other side, dark and unforgiving but free. I turned to unlock the gate, hands shaking from cold and fear. Behind me, the male crouched protectively around the female, his breaths growing ragged. The female touched my shoulder lightly, her fingers trembling with gratitude or desperation. I could no longer tell. When the lock finally clicked open, relief washed in me like warm water. But the moment the gate swung outward, a harsh beam of light cut through the storm. A helicopter rose above the treetops, its spotlight slicing across the snow. Loudspeakers boomed orders I could barely hear over the roar of blades. Agents burst from the tunnel behind us, their rifles gleaming in the chaotic light. The male looked from the helicopter to me, then to the female. His decision came in a heartbeat. He pushed her forward through the opening and turned his back to the gate, towering between us and the incoming danger. His roar split the frozen air, not in rage but in defiance. Gunfire erupted. Snow exploded around us. The male staggered as bullets tore into him, but he did not fall. He planted his feet, bracing himself as though his body alone could hold back the entire weight of human fear. I shouted for them to stop, but my voice was a broken whisper against the storm's fury. The female cried out and tried to return to him, but he thrust her toward me with the last of his strength. His eyes met mine, dark, steady, filled with the same quiet kindness the elder once showed me. A final message lived inside that gaze. Protect her! He collapsed to his knees as another volley struck him. The ground beneath him stained dark. I caught the female as she lunged forward, sobbing in a voice that cracked through the storm like splitting wood. The male touched her face with a trembling hand, a farewell so gentle it hollowed out my chest. With one final breath, his eyes closed. The world fell unbearably silent. The helicopter light swept past us, searching, but the storm thickened, swallowing everything in white. I pulled the female into the forest, her grief echoing through the trees. Branches whipped against us as we disappeared deeper into the dark, the male's sacrifice burning behind us like a collapsing star. We didn't stop until the sound of pursuit dissolved into the storm. In a small hollow, she sank to her knees, head bowed, breath shaking. I knelt beside her, my hand trembling as I rested it against her shoulder. I do not know how long we remained there, the world quiet except for wind and grief. When she finally rose, she touched my chest in the same gesture the elder once used. A thank you, a farewell. Then she vanished into the forest, her silhouette swallowed by the storm. They never found her. Years later, I still feel the warmth of that touch and the weight of the truth they gave me. Their warning wasn't only about their dying world. It was about ours. And now, as I sit alone in this cabin with the storm rising once more, I know this confession is the last thing I owe them, for I can still hear the male's final breath in the wind. And I know it's time to keep my promise. Which city are you watching our video from? Please leave a comment. Please subscribe to the channel as well. Thank you.